Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about the fruit class example, but before we get to that, I want to go way back to something we did at the start of the year. If you go to your examples folder, you should find the DOM exercise. And so this exercise is where we first talked about this idea in JavaScript of the document object model. And this is basically something we've been using all year where we're manipulating specific properties of objects that are coded into our document. So a really simple example of this, right, is if we're looking back at this again, this DOM exercise, the function alert message, we have two variables here, text value is fave color, or excuse me, two variables here, text value and fave color, right, and both of these have very similar looking code, right. Text value is document dot get element by ID, and then here we have an ID text output, which is in our body somewhere, and then we grab the value of it. And so it's specifically the value property that is getting saved into this variable text value, and then we can do whatever we want with that variable, okay? And we do it again for fave color, okay? And so the DOM is basically where we are specifying what specific element that is somewhere in our HTML body, right, that we want to manipulate, okay? But it doesn't have to necessarily be something in the body that we want to manipulate, okay? And so a more recent example of this is looking at our image movement exercise, which was done very recently, okay? And we have an example here. We have this global variable rectangle image, and we made it equal to a new image, okay? And if you put your mouse over the word image, you should see something like what's popping up on the screen for me here. This is an example of an image class HTML element, okay? And within this class called capital I image, there are certain properties. So again, going back to the DOM exercise, right? This specific element that had the ID of ID text output, it had a specific property that we wanted. It had a value, right? That's what we wanted to manipulate, okay? In the image movement exercise, right, we created a new class of objects, right? This was an image element, okay? And it has a specific property called the SRC, the source, right? And so if you put your mouse over SRC there, it'll say the word property. We set that property equal to something specific, okay? And so this is the idea here, right, is that we can create something that is in a class of objects. So again, if I go back to this DOM exercise, what is get element by ID doing, right? Well, if we take a look at get element by ID on W3 Schools, right, we can scroll down, right? So get element by ID method, another word for function, returns an element with a specified value, okay? It's one of the most common methods in the HTML document object model. And if we scroll down a little bit further, right, it takes an ID as a parameter, and what does it return? It returns an object, okay? So again, that's the O in DOM, right? So get element by ID, right? That element that it's returning is called an object, right? And then once we have that object, we can get specific properties from there or manipulate those properties, right? And make it equal to, or use it however we want, okay? So again, going back to the image movement exercise, right? What we're doing here is a little bit more advanced, right? So when we did this in class, we didn't really talk about what we were doing here, okay? But this is going to be kind of the main thing for today, right? Is we're going to be making a class of object, okay? And that's what we're doing here in this fruit class example, okay? Is we're defining a new class of object, all right? And so the way we do that is we first write class. Now notice this is just in the script tag, so this is JavaScript, right? We write class, we write the name of the class, and then the first thing we do is we write what looks like a function, but it's not. It is called the constructor, okay? And what we're setting up here is we are saying, okay, when I make an element in this class of objects called fruit class, right? When I construct that element, right, I should give it three things: a fruit name, a fruit color, and a fruit edible. Now, I can make these up however I want, right? These are just the three I chose here, okay? And these are my parameters, right? These are placeholders, right? So these don't have any actual value right now. And what I'm going to do immediately is take those three parameters and I'm going to save them with shorter names, okay? So any object that is a fruit class object, right, it will have a name property, which will be based on the first parameter that gets passed through it, a color property, which will be based on the second parameter that gets passed through it, and an edible property, which is based on the third parameter that gets passed to it. Okay, so again, looking back at image movement, right, I defined rectangle image as an image class object, right? Well, then part of this class is an SRC property. Okay, and then I'm just choosing to make it whatever I want. But the way this one works, I didn't actually have to write any thing in the parentheses here. Okay, when I do this for this fruit class, I will, and this is already in our code. We'll take a look at that in a moment. Okay, actually, you know what? Let's do that now. We'll come back to these functions. So here's two examples. Okay, let f1 be a new fruit class object. Okay, so when I create something in this class of objects, I have to give it the three parameters I have to pass an argument in for the three parameters that are in my constructor. So quote apple will take the place of fruit name, and then when I use this property, it'll just be dot name. Okay, quote red is going in for fruit color, and then I'm choosing to make whether or not this fruit is edible true or false. Okay, I don't have to make it this way. I could have made it, a string and made it yes or no, but I'm choosing to make this, right? So I wrote up here, right, three attributes, right? Name and color are both strings, and then whether or not it's edible is going to be a Boolean, meaning true or false. Okay, and so this object f1 is now a fruit class object. Okay, and now I can also define not just properties of my class, I can also make specific functions that only apply to fruit class objects. So this is a method called alert info, right? Where the code I write here just looks like normal code, right? If you go back to the DOM exercise, right? It's kind of the same idea as what we did back here. Okay, right? Create an output variable, right? Concatenate some strings, okay? Except in order to get the values here, I write this dot name. So you're going to see the word this a lot. Okay, this is a way of saying for this fruit class object, the name attribute. Okay, and so again, that's coming from whatever I passed in first, right? And so it is now just called this dot name. It's not called fruit name anymore. Remember, parameter is placeholder, right? We're going to replace fruit name, right? We're going to save it to the dot name property of this object. Okay, output, same thing, right? Color, this dot color, right? Adding on to output edible, right? This dot edible. Okay, and so I have a button here, I have a function here called show f1, and I write the name of my object, right? So f1, if I put my mouse over it, it says let f1, and it says colon fruit class because it's recognized as a fruit class object. Okay, and fruit class objects have a method called alert info. Okay, so this is all being run inside of this function show f1, which is on click. All right, and so I'm going to go ahead and run this now. So I have this open right here. Okay, and so if I click show f1, right, sorry for the tiny font, right, but it's all there. Name apple, color is red, edible is true. And now this is one fruit class object. Okay, and by the way, I should have mentioned these are global variables. Okay, it's also worth mentioning, just to double check, right, that these variables were created outside of the brackets for the class. Okay, so everything I have here, alert info and the constructor, all of this is inside the curly brackets for fruit class. When I want to make a fruit class object, I do it outside of those curly brackets. I don't have to make it a global variable. I'm choosing to in this instance. So here's another one. F2 is going to be new fruit class object. This one is going to be a lemon, yellow, and are lemons edible? You know, yes, but do we want to eat a lemon? Not really. Okay. Not on its own anyways. And so this fruit class object also has a method called alert info, pardon me, right, that we will put inside of the show F2 function, which is on click with that second button, okay, and so we can click that. Name is lemon, color is yellow, edible is false, okay. Okay, so let's add a little bit more to this, and maybe this will help you guys out a little bit. So let's create another instance of this fruit class object. So I'm going to make a new variable. And now, you're noticing these very simple names, F1, F2, F3, right? And that's because the goal here is to, put all the details in the properties, right? I'm not making a variable called apple equals new fruit class because apple is the fruit name, right? That is getting saved to the name property, okay? Right? So that's the idea here, right? Is we're putting all the details in the properties. So I'm going to make a new variable here. Let F3 equal new fruit class. And we will go with grape. Okay, grapes, and we'll make it a green grape. And are they edible? You bet they are. Okay, and we will make that fruit class object. If I put my mouse over F3, it says fruit class. Okay. And I could make another function here, but I'm going to go a different way on this, right? I'm going to directly put the method into the onClick down here. So let's go ahead and make another button. So input type equals button, value equals show F3, onClick. Let's just go F3 dot alert info, open close parentheses. Okay, so, I could make a function like I did here, right? But it's just one line of code, right? And this is JavaScript code. I can just put this directly into the onClick, and this will, save us a little bit of time. Okay, so I'm going to do this way, right? Let's go back here, right? Let's go ahead and refresh. Here's my button, show F3. Name is grape, color is green, edible is true. Okay. And so you can make as many objects of this class as you want, okay? And now what you can also do is you can also make methods, right? As many methods in a class as you'd want. So we made alert info. Let's make another one here. So I'm inside the curly brackets for the class. So after alert info, I'll make another one. I'll call it is heavy. Notice that I'm not writing the word function here, right? I'm not writing function alert info. Function is heavy, right? Functions are something that apply to the whole document, theoretically, right? Everything I'm doing now only applies to fruit class objects, right? So I'm not creating a function that's supposed to be for my whole document, okay? This is something specifically for my fruit class objects, F1, F2, F3, okay? So I'm going to make something called isHeavy, and I'm just going to say, oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I forgot to make the property first. Let's go back up. Okay, my apologies. Let's go to the constructor. Let's add a fourth property here to every fruit class object. Okay, I am going to call it fruit weight. Okay, and what I'm going to do, excuse me, is I'm going to make a fourth property called weight. So this dot weight equals fruit weight. Okay, and now what this means is every time I make a fruit class object, I have to pass in something that takes the place of fruit weight. So that means I have to go back to all of my fruit class objects that I've already made and give them all a weight. Okay, so how much does an apple weigh, right? We'll say it's in grams or something, right? We'll say 100, we'll say a lemon is 120, and we'll say a grape is, I don't know, 12. I don't know how much a grape weighs in grams. I bet somebody will look it up, though. Okay, so this is the idea here. All right, so now there have to be 4 elements when I make a fruit class object. So you can see when I put my mouse over fruit class, it says constructor, fruit name, fruit color, fruit edible, fruit weight, right? And so we have to make 4, right? If I make it without, right, we're going to run into some issues, right? So I have to make sure I'm passing in 4 arguments to take the place of my 4 parameters. And so now what I want to do with this function is heavy is I want to make this based on whether or not my fruit class object is heavy or not. So I'm going to go if, and I will say based on the weight. Now again, fruit weight is the parameter. That gets saved to a property called the weight of that object. Okay? And so I'm going to do if the weight of this object, so this dot weight is greater than, and I'll just pick an arbitrary number. I'll go greater than 100. Not actually the authority on if fruits are heavy. So we'll just say return true. Oh, we'll go lowercase t. There we go. Okay, and we'll do an else and just say return false. Okay. Okay, and then, what we should also do is go back to our alert info and let's add a little bit more to the output there because we have the weight as well. And then, by the way, we talked about this /n way back when we were doing Mad Libs. That is the escape character for a new line. Okay, and so let's go output plus equals quote weight this dot weight, and we'll just end it right there. Okay, so this will add the weight to alert info. Let's go see now what that looks like real quick if I refresh, right? So I get the weight added now for all of my objects. Okay, and so let's go back, and now we're gonna go ahead and make some buttons, right, to run our is heavy. Okay, so let's go down here. Okay, and I'm just going to do a line break. Okay, let's go input type equals button value equal is F1 heavy. On click. And now, again, we could make a function like we have show F1, show F2. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just going to kind of speed things up here a little bit. So I'm just going to write alert F1 dot, right? And now, notice this, by the way, I should have pointed this out earlier. When I write F1 dot, the only things that come up are things that are associated with fruit class objects, right? The only things that are showing up here, right, are anything associated with my fruit class, right? That's all you're going to see here, okay? And so I have a method. Notice the difference in shape and color. This is kind of nice that VS Code does this, right? In purple, and it looks like a cube. Those are my methods or functions. And then in the blue, looks like a rectangular prism or a box. Those are my properties. So I want to run the method is heavy, open close parentheses. Okay, and then we'll close that. All right, and let's go ahead and try that real quick. All right, so let's refresh the page. Is F1 heavy? And it says false. It is not heavy. Okay, and now let's just go ahead and make our lives easier by copying that. Okay, and we'll just change that to F2. We'll change that to F3. F2 and F3. Okay, and so now we should have 3 extra buttons here. All of them are just alerting whatever the is heavy method returns for these classes of, or this class of objects, right? So is F1 heavy? Was my apple heavy? No, it was equal to 100, not greater. Is the lemon heavy? True. Is the grape heavy? It says false. Okay. So this was just supposed to be your introduction to classes, okay? So we're going to do a lot more with this. And so just to give you a quick preview of this, why would I want to do this, right? Why would I do things this way? Why would I define a new class of objects in my document, right? Why would I want that? Well, here's an example, okay? And we're going to do this later on in the year, but just think of something simple like Mario, right? So in Mario, right, there's a whole bunch of platforms across the levels, right? Those platforms, right, they all have an X, they have a Y, right? They have a certain number of bricks that, wide each of those platforms is, okay? Things like that, right? Are they destructible? Yes or no? That could be your Boolean, okay? Right? So you can, if you have multiple of some object in your game, right, making a class for that object is a good idea. Okay, so that's just one simple example. We'll do a lot more with this later on. Okay, all right. So we're gonna leave it at that for now. Okay, and then I will see you guys next time. Bye.